number of different ways throughout the study so that the city could use that information to refine its minority business plan, to ensure that it's as effective as possible, but also that it is in compliance with current legal standards, both relevant case law as well as federal and state and local regulations that inform programs of that sort. So the study itself was made up of a large collection of both quantitative and qualitative research tasks. In the spirit of time, I'm going to focus in on 4 of those tasks, what we really consider the core of the disparity study: the utilization analysis, the availability analysis, the disparity analysis, and then how the city can use information from those studies to refine its implementation of the minority business plan. So beginning with utilization analysis, the primary objective of the utilization analysis was to measure the actual dollars that the City of Asheville spent with minority and women-owned businesses during a 5-year study period. In this case, we looked at all the contracts that the City of Asheville awarded in construction, professional services, and goods and general services between July 1st, 2012 and June 30th, 2017. Once we compiled all that information and made sense of it, we then went out and conducted what we call utilization telephone surveys to confirm basic information about the businesses that actually did that work, specifically the race, ethnicity, and gender of their ownership, as well as their primary lines of work so that we could classify contracts appropriately. Based on that analysis, what we found was that 10.4% of the city's dollars during our study period went to either minority or women-owned businesses, and that's regardless of whether they were certified as such in the state of North Carolina. So they just had to have reported that their ownership is 51% or greater minority or women, and if it's minority-owned, what relevant group represented the ownership. So of that 10.4%, or 12.3 million, the vast majority went to non-Hispanic white women-owned businesses. So 8.8 of the 10.4% went to white woman-owned firms. Another 1% or so went to Hispanic American-owned firms, and about a half a percentage point went to Black American-owned businesses. Now, this information on its own, of course, is very useful, but it becomes even more instructive when the city has a benchmark to compare it against. So in a vacuum, the percentage is just a number, but how does it compare to what you would expect minority and women-owned businesses to receive based on their existence in the marketplace, the types of work they do, and their interest in actually working for the city? And that's the primary objective of what we call the availability estimate, to estimate benchmarks for what the city might expect minority and women-owned businesses to receive on their construction, professional services, and goods and general services contracts. We use what's called a custom census survey approach to estimating availability. So once we've identified the industries that are most relevant to city spend and the geographic market area where contractors come from to attempt availability surveys, what we call availability surveys, with the businesses that might be potentially available for that work, so that we can understand what types of businesses are out there and what their characteristics are. So as part of those surveys, we asked them about their primary lines of work, the year in which they were established, where they actually serve customers, their actual interest in working for the City of Asheville moving forward, whether they work as prime contractors or subcontractors, the largest contracts they're able to actually bid on or perform, and then of course the race, ethnicity, and gender of their ownership. Once we've collected that information, we then can match characteristics of individual businesses to characteristics of the prime contracts and subcontracts that the city actually awarded during our study period, so that we can, in that way, accurately estimate the percentage of dollars that might be expected to go to minority and women-owned businesses. Just as a quick example, if this is a contract that the city awarded during the study period, electrical work subcontract, it was awarded in 2006 and is worth $1.2 million. Only the firms that complete surveys with us, that end up in our database, whose characteristics match the characteristics of this contract piece, would be considered available for that contract piece. We then repeat that process for every prime contract and subcontract in our analysis, and then aggregate all that information in a dollar-weighted way so that we can estimate with a great deal of precision the percentage of dollars we'd expect minority and women-owned businesses to receive. So based on the results of that analysis, what our analysis showed is that based on availability, the city could expect 12.8% or $15 million to go to minority and women-owned businesses across its construction, professional services, and goods and general services contracts. And that availability differs based on group. So again, the group with the largest availability is white women-owned businesses at 5.5%. Black American-owned businesses showed an availability of 2.1%, and Native American-owned businesses showed availability of 3.4%. So one key aspect of the study is to actually compare actual participation, or the dollars that businesses actually received, to the dollars we would expect them to receive based on their availability. And that's really the core objective of what we call the disparity analysis. So for the disparity analysis, for a particular group, for a particular set of contracts, we look at the dollars that that group actually received, and we divide it by the dollars that we would expect them to receive. And that results in what's called a disparity index, or a disparity ratio. What you really need to know about the disparity index is if it equals 1, that means that participation is largely in line with availability. If you have a disparity index of less than 1, that means there's a disparity. Minority and women-owned businesses are being underutilized on city contracts. If there's a disparity index of 0.8 or 80% or less, that indicates a substantial underutilization. Many courts take that as an indication of an inference of discrimination against a particular group in the marketplace, and that's often used as justification for an organization to use relatively strong measures to help address any barriers, things like race and gender conscious contracting goals or other such measures. So looking at the results of the disparity analysis, first considering all city contracts considered together. So again, this is construction, professional services, and goods and general services all dumped into the same bucket. You see a line here drawn at 100. That's the line of parity. That means, again, that participation is in line with availability. And then we drew a line here at 80, which is the threshold for what's considered substantial underutilization. So the first thing to notice is that when you consider all minority and women-owned businesses together, they showed a disparity index of 82. In other words, they're receiving about 82 cents of every dollar you would expect them to receive based on their availability for city contracts, which is close to that threshold of being considered substantial. We then also looked at disparity index results separately for each group, and the substantial disparities are shown or highlighted here in those results broken down by industry. So construction versus non-construction contracts. So what you'll notice, judging by the lines being more to the right, is that outcomes on construction contracts were actually a bit better than outcomes on non-construction contracts. So minority and women-owned businesses considered together showed a disparity index of 149 on construction contracts, as opposed to a substantial disparity on non-construction contracts of 41. And then if you look at the data group by group, what you see is that Asian American-owned businesses showed a substantial disparity on both sets of contracts. Black American-owned businesses, same thing. Hispanic American-owned businesses showed a disparity on non-construction contracts, but were actually above parity on construction contracts. Native American-owned businesses showed substantial disparities on both construction and non-construction contracts, and then white woman-owned businesses showed a disparity on non-construction contracts, but not on construction contracts. So in terms of considerations that the city can make in light of these data, so in addition to the quantitative analyses, we also collected a great deal of anecdotal information, qualitative information as part of the study. So we held public meetings at the beginning of the process where folks had the opportunity to learn about the Disparity Study, but also tell us about their experiences working in the marketplace. In addition, we conducted in-depth interviews with business owners and trade association representatives throughout the marketplace so that we could sit down with them and have long discussions and conversations about their experiences working in the marketplace. So we compiled all that and analyzed it along with our quantitative information. And some of the comments that came out of that give the city insights into some of the barriers that minority and women-owned businesses and small businesses are facing, and also offer them information that they can consider as they're refining their implementation of the minority business plan. So one thing that came up was issues around contract notification. So several small businesses and minority and women-owned businesses said that it's sometimes difficult for them to learn about city opportunities when they come up. So if there are subcontracting opportunities that they could actually compete for, or smaller contracts that they could compete for, often they just feel that they're not aware of them. So knowing about them might help them compete for them, and that's information obviously the city can take into account as it looks to engage businesses moving forward. In addition, one thing that came out of the data itself was issues around local participation. So particularly in professional services, a relatively large percentage of dollars go to businesses that are actually based in Mecklenburg County and Charlotte. So if the city can look at the efforts it's making to engage and find businesses throughout its own marketplace, that might help to increase participation among minority and women-owned firms that are actually based here, as opposed to sending dollars over to Charlotte. Although that is admittedly a tougher thing to do, because Charlotte is the largest city in the area, and when particularly professional services opportunities come up, those firms are also competing, but it is something that the city can keep in mind moving forward. Issues around prompt payment also came up, not specifically or always with the city. So the city has prompt payment policies, so it ensures that prime contractors receive payment within 30 days of the city receiving invoices from them. A lot of issues come up when small businesses and minority and women-owned businesses are working as subcontractors, and there are delays. Not only do you have to wait those 30 days, but then an added delay for the prime contractors to actually pay them as well. So other organizations will often extend their prompt payment policies to that prime-sub relationship. That's something the city can consider doing as well. Some organizations, although this is much rarer, will actually automate payments to subcontractors from prime contractors' invoices and payments themselves. That's something else the city could consider doing. But any measures where they can help minimize the amount of time that smaller businesses have to wait for payment would be helpful, because of course having capital on hand is particularly important to small businesses who have to use that capital to start their next project, to pay their staff, so forth and so on. Another consideration the city can make is around contract-specific goals. So I mentioned earlier that the existence of substantial disparities is often used by organizations to consider stronger measures to address any barriers or any disparities. Since they exist here, one thing the city could consider doing is implementing race and gender conscious goals on some of their contracts. So as part of having prime contractors bid on particular contracts, looking at whether it makes sense to use goals where they have to meet those goals at the time of bid, either by making subcontracting commitments with minority and women-owned businesses, or showing good faith efforts that they actually tried doing so, but for whatever reason weren't successful, and then the city would have to sign off on those good faith efforts before awarding the contract to the prime. There's a number of legal considerations that the city has to make in implementing such a program, but it is an option that's available to them and something they can consider moving forward. And then information from the disparity study, particularly the availability analysis, can also help inform the city's setting of overall aspirational goals that it currently has set for each one of its contracting areas. So right now, the city has goals set of 12% in construction when you consider minority and women-owned businesses considered together, 51% for its professional services contracts, and 25% for its goods and general services contracts. One piece of information that organizations often use in setting their overall goal is results from an availability analysis. So setting their goals that are informed by the existence of minority and women-owned businesses out in the marketplace. Our analysis suggests that goals that might be more reflective of the availability of minority and women-owned businesses out in the marketplace would be closer to 8% for construction, 24% for professional services, and 17% for goods and general services. Now, the availability analysis is in no way deterministic, and most organizations take other information about conditions in the local marketplace, about previous participation of minority and women-owned businesses when they're setting their overall goals, but it is a data point that the city can take into consideration if it decides to adjust its overall aspirational goals moving forward. So I want to thank you again for joining us here tonight. I also want to take the time to thank Brenda for her help throughout the process, all the different departments within the city that got us the data that we requested and worked with us to make sure that we understood the data and were able to conduct the disparity study successfully. It's not easy doing a disparity study. I don't mean that just for my team. I mean that more for the organization, because there's a lot of data they've got to put together and send our way. So it takes a lot for a city or an organization to do that. So I want to be sure that I thank Brenda and the rest of the city staff that helped us throughout the process. Now I just want to open up to any questions that you all might have or comments. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so just the first one, I got a series of.
Sure.
Determine which categories it makes its codes, or is it just based on the categories that the city has for providing construction, professional services, and business services? Was it our standard industrial classification that makes its codes, or what?
It was. So we use standard industrial classification codes, so SIC codes, which are 8-digit codes, and they just get at a level of detail that we like, so we understand what work was involved with each contract, and then classify it accordingly, and then build it up to the construction professional services.
Okay, so also the 12.8% translated down to 15% minority owned, those are disaggregated. You said something about African Americans, 2.1%. Is that pretty? Is that what that was?
Yep, so the availability of Black American-owned businesses in particular within the region is 2.1%. In other words, they would be expected to receive 2.1% of the city's dollars.
Okay, so when you multiply that times 15 million, that would be the aggregate dollar amount per kind of like a sign.
You would multiply the 2.1 million by, or 2.1% by the $118 million that we looked at as part of the study.
$118 million spend, is that correct?
That's right, across construction, professional services, and goods and general services.
And then also, the list of items, we're talking about contract notification.
Yep.
The city's been pretty good about notifying contractors. Problems being is when you, is the technical specifications and all that, responsiveness and responsibility of submitting bids that comport with what the city wants. So that's a local participation, about local, we talked about that, how to write an ordinance in place. So I think that's keeping not only women and minority owned business, but all local businesses. This is just some thoughts that we had, and we were talking about this the other day.
Yeah.
As well. The prompt payment, the city already, like I said, but one thing that when I worked for APAC, which is the largest highway contract in the country, they would prompt pay, and there was with some of the work that we had was kind of written in from the DOT, and with DOT certification and just the relationship. So they can do it. The city can do it with their generals and primes to pay that out.
Yeah, and we've worked with organizations similarly that have payment policies that extend to their subs. So, for example, the state of Indiana has a policy where once a prime gets paid, you have to pay your subs within 10 days after that, and they follow up with the prime and make sure that they've done so, and they follow up with the subs to make sure they've done so. So some organizations do that. There's a lot of resources involved in that, of course, but it is there's also precedent for it.
I
Oh, no, please.
In the professional services field, whereas most professional services are let for an RFQ rather than an RFP, a lot of that comes down to discernment about qualifications, and the process is wholly different. I know that we looked at some data where the water department had gone out and solicited an African-American firm, I believe they were in Raleigh, where a substantial amount of funds were expended, but they were an out-of-town firm. Understanding that it's an A&E firm, architect, and engineering, that is RFQ. So there's a difference, there's a big difference between the way those are made. Could you kind of address that as far as RFPs for construction versus professional contracts?
RFPs for construction versus professional contracts. So do you mean, well, so construction, and Brenda, correct me if I'm wrong, the city awards those primarily on a low bid basis.
Yes, and kind of like your district too, they'll check references, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, cost on it, okay?
Exactly, as opposed to a proposal, right. Whereas typically, a proposal process, which is something that we went through to win this contract, it gives the city more discretion in looking at the firm's qualifications, looking at cost as a factor, but not necessarily the determining factor. You know, there's good arguments to be made for both, right? So you can imagine that if there's a circumstance where there's an organization that is discriminatory, I'm not saying the city is, but you can imagine a situation where that happens, the more discretion they have, the more they're able to pick and choose winners, the more likely that discrimination can manifest itself, right? On the low bid side though, the other issue is that often organizations will rely specifically and only on cost, and you can't take into account things like, well, are they including minority and women-owned businesses? Are they including small businesses as part of their team? Because at the end of the day, it just all comes down to cost. So there's trade-offs on both.
So, Mayor, we do have MWBE outreach requirements on all of our bidding.
On
Not just
construction as well.
And RFP and RFQ. So construction and procurement are lowest responsible.
Perfect.
We're still looking at all that stuff. And responsive means, did you give us our non-inclusion affidavit? Did you outreach? There's forms they have to complete. There's outreach they have to do. There's documentation they have to give us. So that's all put into the mix of deciding.
There you have it.
So, yeah.
And then another thing that I noticed too, and I promise you, this is my final.
Sure.
Could you also speak to the notion of contract bundling? I've seen the grass contract for the City of Asheville. I kind of monitor them, have been for a long time. And it was like the grass contract evolved into a pressure washing contract, okay? So the notion that sometimes when larger firms can get all of this bundled from maybe from a relationship basis where minority firms and younger firms don't have that connection.
Yeah.
It becomes like difficult for a small or a young firm to get in their bundle, because so could there be maybe a process put in place where they're unbundled, where applicable or necessary? I don't know, but I've seen a lot of it.
Yeah, I can't speak to that example in particular, but one thing, what we've suggested in our report, and one thing that often comes up is the idea of unbundling contract pieces where it makes sense. Again, this turns out to be more resource intensive for an organization because they have to manage more contracts, but the degree to which an organization can take large contract pieces and sensibly unbundle them into separate contracts that are smaller and more focused in work areas is helpful to small businesses and many minority and women-owned businesses, just because it tends to end up in pieces that are more digestible. But again, there's an organizational cost to that the city has to decide whether it's willing to take on. Sure. Yes, ma'am.
So I only have two questions. But to follow up on the question about professional services, did you look at the selection process that the city uses for professional services? Because as a women's owned business, there used to be a credit percentage of their evaluation form for your level of participation in minority and women-owned business at the table, because it's qualification based.
Right.
And I've always, as a women's owned business, brought a lot of other businesses with me that are smaller, women-owned and minority businesses. We no longer have that credit visible as part of the evaluation process. And I'm curious if you caught that, if you saw that, if you evaluated that.
Yeah, well, so we're aware of that only to the extent that the city doesn't use race, so that would be considered a race and gender conscious measure.
But we used to have that.
Yeah, I can't speak to what happened in the past, but
Look at from 12 to 17.
what's that?
In that period from 12 to 17, I believe they still had that, at least in professional services.
Yeah,
On the evaluation.
our understanding was that all the contracts that we looked at as part of 2012 to 2017 didn't have evaluation metrics of that sort, that they were all awarding a race and gender neutral measure. But again, Brenda, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm not quite understanding what you're saying. So you're
It used to
saying
be like
if you're a woman
100% checklist.
No, I understand the checklist, but you're saying because you're a woman, you got an extra.
Well, they had a category for minority and women-owned business participation.
We do have that. It was a part of all the stuff that we did, the RFP.
As part of the evaluation, or is it just being
But
responsive?
It is part of the evaluation.
But not
Okay.
anymore.
It is part of the evaluation.
Not the ones I've been involved in.
Yeah, it is.
I can give you one, I have an example, it was not, and I was told it was no longer considered. It was looked at but not evaluated as a percentage. The second question I have is related to the city goals, the last slide that you had. Whether, you have from the city how they verify those goals, whether they meet or not meet them, what metrics they use to evaluate.
The
It's
overall
great
goal?
They set a goal, but do they meet it, and what do they meet? Do we know that information?
So I can, Brenda, correct me if I'm wrong, what we were told is that, one of the important reasons for doing the disparity study is because then we can set the goals. So we have not been monitoring the goals. In fact, we were told, because we didn't know the availability within the community, that legally we couldn't have goals because we didn't know what was available. So the reason for doing this whole study is now we know what's available, and then we're moving toward those goals were ones that we had set years ago from the previous disparity study. Does that make sense?
But not used.
But not used. We would
That's
not
all
be
I'm
able to
asking. That's all I'm
present
asking.
what you're asking.
That's what I'm asking. It's nice to see, but if it's not been used, it's good to know that.
Yeah.
And there's a mechanism for it. It's written into the minority business plan that the city intends to monitor and report on those goals. But
In the future.
yeah, again, those data are 25 years old since the last disparity study was conducted in 1993. So now they've got a fresh look at the marketplace.
So
Yes, sir.
Will they give us the information of the names of the corporations? Because it's easy to look at statistics, but when you look at the actual numbers, it shows something different. When they show like the actual numbers that's connected with the statistics, because sometimes statistics are kind of confusing.
So like what firms are available?
Yes.
All
yes,
that?
Yes.
Typically,
like the names of also the companies who were receiving the contracts as well, and the exact amount.
yeah. So all of that information, it's the city's data, so they have access to it. They also have access. They have access to it now only because, especially on the participation side, those data, who did what contracts, live in the city's databases. So that's really a question for the city, and I don't know if that's something that they make publicly available or make available upon request, but that's something that they're.
Steven, what are you particularly asking?
Because there have never been like relationships between those major companies when they want to know like where the subcontracting companies are. Because if they're coming out of Mecklenburg County, I don't think they're going to look inside of Buncombe County for subcontractors. And also like how's the process of them being able to choose from Mecklenburg County with not looking at any African American companies outside or within inside of the state of North Carolina. That's really confusing.
So there's a lot of mechanisms, sorry, I need to stand up. There's a lot of mechanisms that general contractors use to find subcontractors. There's the interactive purchasing system, which, where we list also historically unutilized businesses, where you're registered. And then there's NCDOT, they do certification, they do extensive certification, because you just got through with that. There's also the SBA. We look at the people we've done business with before, and any businesses that come in. So most of our construction projects are big enough that we have pre-submittal meetings. We did away with all this mandatory stuff, because if it's mandatory, you cannot bid. You can bid, but it's not responsible, because you have had to have attended a meeting prior to that. That's kind of the way we've done it. What we're gonna need to do going forward is we have those formal meetings, is looking at informal meetings of finding out where businesses are. So people like yourself, who may know 5 other businesses that are looking at doing business with us, come and get them connected with us. We want to find those businesses. So, and we can always provide you a list of the vendors and what they were paid for the year. And you're part of that list. As our contractor. And Amy.
Just so you know too, there's a new, on the city's website, there's new open data on the contract, so
Right.
you can actually go in and look at all the contract data yourself.
So I have a follow-up question for this gentleman's question. The data that you presented in terms of the minority representation, was that minority businesses across the state, or is that just Buncombe County businesses?
So,
12% that got funded.
yeah. So on the availability side, we limit that just to firms in the marketplace, which go outside of Buncombe County. It's actually Buncombe County and the 8 surrounding counties. And then for professional services, it also extends to Mecklenburg, because enough dollars are going out there that that's part of the city's relevant geographic market area. On the utilization side, that includes basically firms from anywhere. If they're minority or woman-owned, we count that as part of the utilized dollars.
It might be helpful to at some point know how many of those dollars are actually serving Western Market County, the area versus outside the area.
Yep.
I know that has become a sticking point for a lot of businesses. They're competing against big, like you mentioned, big firms who are competing big dollars, and big marketing budgets, when a smaller firm has a harder time getting visible.
Yeah, and it is fair to say that the majority, really a large majority of the dollars do stay within the relevant geographic market area by definition. So we analyze that area where the dollars are.
If Charlotte's part of that,
Charlotte's part of that for professional services only.
that's not right.
Yeah, I mean, that's just sort of that's what it is, basically. And then for construction, where the majority of the city's dollars are, and then goods and general services, the vast majority is here within the 9-county region.
Can I ask you, you just said that's what it is now. It concerns me, I don't know exactly what that meant, but when we talking about taxpaying dollars, that's a concern. Now, private money is different. But, so what actually does it mean, like, that's what it is? Because it's like a question mark still.
No, what I meant by that's what it is it's a data-driven, I mean, that's just what the data say. I'm not attaching whether that's right or wrong to that, but what the data suggests is that a relatively large portion of professional services dollars are coming from Mecklenburg County. That's fact. Whether if the city is concerned with that, they can consider taking measures or take efforts to concentrate those dollars closer to Asheville. But as a matter of fact, it's just a lot of those dollars are currently going to firms who are based in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a way to isolate the data so we can find out what allied resources vendors are located just in Buncombe County, isolate from the other 8 counties, whatever it is you said, so we know who's getting what's available in our particular?
Yeah, so in the county itself, so the city will have a list of the firms that we consider available by different work areas. Now, it's not an exhaustive list, so the idea behind our availability analysis is that we are serving in an unbiased way the marketplace, so that we have a database that's representative of the entire marketplace, but it's at least a starting point in terms of knowing what firms we're considering available, what types of work they do, who they are, so forth and so on, and where they're located.
Could you also address the necessity of this study to satisfy the legal mandates of Richmond versus Croson and Adirondack versus Pena?
Sure. At least in a nutshell, basically what those programs are about, particularly Croson, which is sort of the seminal legal decision that kind of created the disparity study industry, is that you have to be very careful in your use of race and gender conscious measures. So if you're attaching contract specific goals, for example, you have to be careful about what those goals are, what groups are considered eligible to meet those goals, and it has to be based on the business population in your marketplace. So in Croson in particular, the city of Richmond had had goals attached to many of their contracts that were based on the proportion of their population of individuals that were Black. And what the Supreme Court said was that you can't do that, because just because, for example, 30% of your population are Black Americans, that doesn't mean that 30% of your dollars should be going to Black American-owned businesses, because it doesn't translate linearly. You have to actually look at what Black American-owned businesses are out there, what types of work they do, what size of contracts can they work on, and a variety of other characteristics. And you have to make sure that your program is narrowly tailored. In other words, that the types of firms or the groups that are eligible for any race or gender conscious measures that you use, that it's limited to those groups that actually suffer from discrimination or barriers, that there's flexibility in your program, and a variety of other characteristics as well. So essentially it just made sure that organizations like the City of Asheville, like transportation organizations all across the country, set up race and gender conscious programs in a way that are reflective of the marketplace and that don't unduly burden other firms. And it's also why I have a job.
So if let's say a professional service organization, the company is headquartered in California, but they have a local office in Asheville. How is that handled?
We would count them as being within the marketplace for the sake of availability. So to figure out whether a firm is potentially available, one of a whole host of characteristics is that you have to be located somewhere within the 9-county region or 10-county region for professional services. So even if you're headquartered somewhere else, but you have a location here within that area, then you're considered potentially available if you also meet other criteria, like size of the contract and type of work, so forth and so on.
Well, thank you guys for your questions. I want you to have a few minutes to kind of talk to our departments before you leave today. If you have continuing questions, and also want to make sure, did you ask your question? Someone else asked it, so you're
Sorry.
okay? Yeah, I almost forgot, I didn't want to forget you.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. So our city departments are on the peripheral. I want you to take a few minutes to do that. We will kick back on the 7th. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh,